Willow Creek was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. A cluster of tidy streets lined with maple trees, a small main road with a grocery store, a post office, and a single diner that stayed open late for shift workers and insomniacs. People left their doors unlocked. Children played in the park without parents watching every second. The town felt safe, predictable, almost frozen in time. But all of that changed on one cool October evening when 26-year-old Clara Mendez failed to make it home. Clara worked the late shift at the diner, a job she had held for years. That night, the air was crisp and the streets were quiet as she closed up, tucked her apron into her bag, and began her familiar walk home. The route took her past the park, down a narrow path lined with streetlights, and then through 2 residential blocks to her small apartment. She was a creature of habit, and friends later told police she walked the same way every time, never varying her path. But somewhere along that route, Clara disappeared. The first sign something was wrong came the next morning when she didn't show up for her shift. Clara was punctual to a fault, and her manager immediately knew it was out of character. Calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. By early afternoon, her landlord contacted police after noticing her apartment door was locked from the outside, the way you might lock a place if you were leaving it behind. But the strange part was that Clara's keys weren't missing. They were still inside. The search began quickly. Officers traced her usual route and found something deeply unsettling. On a bench near the park's entrance sat Clara's bag. Inside were her apron, her wallet, and her phone, switched off. The bag looked untouched, as if someone had placed it there with care rather than dropped it in a struggle. It gave investigators the eerie impression that this was deliberate. Someone wanted it to be found. The park was combed by search teams and volunteers. Dogs were brought in to pick up her scent, but it ended abruptly near the far side of the park, just before a patch of woods. A nearby pond was drained, but yielded nothing. Officers went door to door, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything unusual. No one had. No strange cars, no sounds of a struggle, not even the echo of hurried footsteps. Days passed with no sign of her. Flyers with Clara's smiling face were taped to every lamppost and shop window. The town's small police force worked day and night, but the case only seemed to grow colder by the hour. It was as if she had been lifted off the face of the earth in total silence. What made it worse was the absence of any clear motive. No enemies, no history of trouble, no reason to vanish. But deep down, many feared this was no random event, and whatever had happened to Clara was part of something much darker. 2 weeks after Clara's disappearance, the investigation had reached a frustrating standstill. Every lead ended in a dead end, every theory crumbled under the weight of missing evidence. Detectives were beginning to fear the trail had gone cold for good. Then, one rainy morning, an unmarked envelope appeared in the mailbox at the Willow Creek Police Department. There was no return address, no writing except for the word "open" scrawled in uneven block letters across the front. Inside was a single black USB drive. When the drive was plugged into a computer, the contents shocked everyone in the room. Dozens of grainy black and white photographs filled the screen. Each image was taken from a distance, as though the photographer was hiding behind something. A tree, a parked car, the corner of a building. The subjects were always women, going about their daily lives, unaware they were being watched. Some were walking to their cars. Others were unlocking their front doors. A few were sitting on park benches, reading or talking on the phone. As the detectives scrolled through the images, one face stopped them cold. Clara. She appeared in multiple shots, captured on different days, in different locations around town. The most recent photograph showed her walking down the narrow path near the park, just 2 nights before she vanished. And in the blurred background, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure in a dark hood. The face wasn't visible, but the shape of the figure seemed deliberate, positioned just far enough away to avoid being identified, yet close enough to make its presence unnerving. The timestamps on the images revealed something even more disturbing. They dated back nearly 3 years. The first few photos featured women no one on the force recognized. Then came faces that matched other unresolved missing person reports from nearby towns. Some of those women had never been found. It became clear that whoever took these photos had been stalking multiple targets for a long time, watching them without their knowledge, studying their routines. Clara was not the first, and she might not be the last. There was no clue as to who sent the envelope. The postmark on the stamp had been smeared, making it impossible to tell where it was mailed from. Fingerprints on the USB drive came back inconclusive. The anonymity felt intentional, as though the sender wanted the police to see what they had but didn't want to reveal themselves. It left detectives wondering, was the sender the stalker themselves, taunting law enforcement? Or was it someone else, maybe an accomplice or even a whistleblower? The photographs were now the most important piece of evidence in the case. They proved Clara's disappearance wasn't a random act of violence, it was premeditated. Someone had been tracking her movements, learning her habits, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But beyond the horror of what happened to Clara, there was an even more chilling realization. The list of women in the photos was long, and many of them were still living in Willow Creek. That meant, somewhere out there, the watcher might still be choosing their next target. Following the discovery of the photographs, investigators began studying the backgrounds in each image, looking for anything that could reveal where they were taken. In one photograph of a woman walking her dog, a weathered building stood in the distance. Its sagging roof and boarded-up windows caught the attention of a detective who had grown up in Willow Creek. He recognized it instantly. It was an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, a place locals avoided, claiming it was unsafe and filled with rodents. The property had been empty for over a decade after a fire damaged part of its structure. But now, it seemed someone had been using it. Police quietly organized a search, approaching the property under the cover of night to avoid attracting attention. The front yard was overgrown, with weeds nearly waist-high, and rusted garden tools lay scattered among the grass. The air smelled faintly of mold and something metallic. The front door was locked, but the back door hung crookedly on its hinges. What stood out most were the fresh footprints in the mud leading directly to it. Someone had been there recently. Inside, the house felt hollow. The wooden floors groaned under each step, and bits of plaster had fallen from the ceiling in thin, pale flakes. The rooms were mostly empty, stripped of furniture and belongings. But in the center of the living room sat a single chair, metal, cold, and facing the wall. That wall was unlike anything the officers expected to see. Every inch of it was covered in photographs, printed on cheap paper and taped in tight rows. The pictures were all of women. Some looked like they had been taken with a long lens from across the street, others appeared closer, almost face to face. The images were arranged in a disturbing order, each labeled with numbers and dates written in black marker. The earliest photo was from 5 years earlier. Toward the right side of the wall, certain images had been crossed out with large red X marks. Clara's photograph was among them. While documenting the scene, officers found a narrow set of stairs leading to the basement. The smell grew stronger as they descended, damp and sharp. Down below, the space was dim, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from a cord. In one corner was a collection of personal items: a scarf, a set of keys, a worn sneaker, a broken bracelet. These were not random objects. Several matched descriptions from missing persons reports spanning multiple years. Strands of hair were found clinging to some of them. Everything about the house suggested it had been a staging ground, a place where someone meticulously tracked and prepared for their crimes. Yet there was no sign of Clara herself. Whoever had been there seemed to have left in a hurry, but the chilling detail was that the most recent photographs were only days old. That meant the person responsible was still active, still nearby, and likely already focusing on their next victim. The house had given investigators answers, but it had also deepened the terrifying mystery. The photographs from the abandoned house were laid out in the police conference room, each one pinned to a large corkboard in chronological order. It didn't take long for detectives to notice something unsettling. Every disappearance linked to the case had occurred on the same day of the month, exactly 3 months apart. The realization sent a quiet ripple of unease through the team. The dates formed a perfect sequence going back 5 years, and when they followed it forward, the next one was only 6 days away. Whoever was behind the abductions was following a precise schedule, almost like a ritual. Investigators knew they had only a small window of time to act. They pulled records of women who fit the general profile of the previous victims, ages between 20 and 30, living or working within a certain radius of the town center, often seen walking alone. Officers began discreet surveillance in key areas, setting up cameras on quiet streets, near bus stops, and along the park path where Clara had vanished. Undercover patrols roamed the neighborhoods at night, keeping their presence subtle to avoid scaring off the suspect. The town, unaware of the exact details, sensed something was wrong. There were fewer people on the streets after sunset. Windows were locked earlier, and the once busy diner saw fewer late-night customers. But for the investigators, every shadow seemed suspicious, every passerby a potential threat. On the predicted date, a cold wind swept through Willow Creek. By early evening, the streets were nearly empty. Surveillance teams kept their eyes glued to the live feeds, scanning for anything unusual. Just after 10 p.m., one of the cameras picked up a young woman named Lydia Harper walking home from her job at the grocery store. She fit the profile almost exactly, mid-20s, alone, and heading down a dimly lit street near the industrial edge of town. Moments later, the figure appeared. A man in a dark hoodie, head lowered, moving with a slow but deliberate pace behind her. He maintained just enough distance to stay unnoticed, but his movements matched the patterns seen in the old photographs. The officers watching the feed alerted the nearest patrol unit. Lydia, unaware she was being followed, kept walking. As she turned onto a side street, the hooded figure quickened his pace. He reached into his pocket, and that was when two unmarked police vehicles cut across the road, blocking his path. Officers moved in from both sides, weapons drawn. The man froze, glancing briefly toward an alley before realizing there was no escape. In seconds, he was on the ground, handcuffed. His name was Daniel Crow, a 38-year-old janitor who had worked at several local schools and government buildings. On the surface, he was unremarkable, the kind of person no one remembered passing in the grocery store. But in his backpack were a camera, duct tape, and a small knife. The arrest was a breakthrough, yet investigators sensed this was far from over. Daniel was only one man, but the scale of the crimes hinted at something much larger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Daniel Crow was brought into custody and placed in a stark, windowless interrogation room. 4 hours, detectives asked questions, presenting evidence, showing him photographs from the abandoned house, and detailing the items found in his backpack. He never spoke a word. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, his expression unreadable. Every so often, he would glance toward the corners of the room, almost as if he knew he was being watched and wanted to acknowledge it. The silence was unnerving, but the forensic evidence was overwhelming. Search warrants were executed at Daniel's small apartment. Inside, investigators found a neatly organized but disturbing collection of hard drives and memory cards. They were carefully labeled with dates, matching the timeline of the disappearances. The files contained hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, women walking alone at night, unlocking their doors, or sitting at coffee shop tables. Clara appeared in many of them, sometimes filmed from across the street, other times from alarmingly close distances. The footage alone would have been enough to convict him of stalking, but hidden deeper within the files was something far worse. In several encrypted folders, police uncovered clips showing parts of abductions in progress. The videos were edited, almost cinematic, focusing on the chase, the struggle, and in some cases, the moment the victim was restrained. Disturbingly, some files didn't appear to be filmed in Willow Creek at all. Different backgrounds suggested other towns, other victims. Digital forensics experts traced fragments of the data to a hidden online forum, buried deep within encrypted networks. It became clear that Daniel was not working alone. He was part of a secret group trading and selling what they called hunt videos. Members recorded their crimes, shared techniques, and even discussed potential future targets. The wall of photographs in the abandoned house had not been built by a lone predator. It was part of a system, a twisted catalog of victims for the group's use. Daniel was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful surveillance, and conspiracy. The evidence linked him to several missing persons cases in neighboring areas, though not all of the victims had been found. The most haunting gap remained Clara. Despite combing through every location tied to him, no body was ever discovered, and no conclusive proof of her fate emerged. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled with the families of missing women. Daniel sat silently through every session, never reacting to the testimony or the evidence. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. But for investigators, the victory felt incomplete. The online network had vanished, its members disappearing from the digital space within days of Daniel's arrest. Willow Creek was left shaken, its sense of safety permanently broken. Even with Daniel behind bars, the knowledge lingered that others involved were still free. Somewhere, hidden in plain sight, they could be watching and waiting. For many in the town, the most terrifying thought was not what had already happened, It was the certainty that it could happen again.